Right, everyone. Hello and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today on our Tech Talk series. Today's topic will be how Microsoft Azure works to boost cloud solutions. I'll be hosting today's Tech Talk on behalf of Jay only for the. I am Rosie Polatron and I'm part of Advancio's team. So before I introduce you to our speakers, I would love to share a little bit about what Advancio is. We're a tech outsourcing and software development firm with headquarters in LA. We are present in all stages of software development, and we can scale your engineering team or provide a specific dedicated team for your firm's needs. So regarding our speakers, I'll do a quick introduction in each of them. Kareem Knight is co-founder of Advancio, specializing in .NET developers and staff augmentation, helping businesses thrive through digital transformation. Thank you, Kareem, for joining us, and we're so happy to have you here.
Thanks, Rosie. I'm glad to be here.
All right. We also have Peter Shand, Cloud Solution Architect at Microsoft, who is also a technology and business leader with experience integrating technology and business solutions for diverse industries. Thank you, Peter, as well for joining us, and we're very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Rosie. Great opportunity. I'm glad I'm here.
All righty. Let's jump right into the topic. I have a couple of questions for each one of you. The first one would be for Kareem. What is Microsoft Azure and why has it become one of the top cloud services?
Well, Microsoft Azure is a cloud service platform that enables companies to move away from on-premise and delivers infrastructure as a service for all their technology needs, whether it's software development or productivity, or reporting or data. There's a tool, there's a product for every need within the enterprise. It has not been first in the market. It came later to AWS. That's why it has a big market share. However, Microsoft has always been a brand name in the enterprise world as far as IT is concerned. And it was only a natural progression for enterprises that have already been on Microsoft tools to adopt the Microsoft Cloud in order to scale their business. So the adoption, I believe the reason why it has grown so fast during the years is mainly because that natural progression for companies to move from on-premise to cloud using the same vendor, but also Microsoft has done a really good job when it first launched Azure as far as user interface and ease of use. It was much, much easier for newcomers to the cloud to manage Azure than it was AWS back in the day. So I think that those are some reasons why the adoption has been so quick.
All right. Thank you, Kareem. Nice. The second question is for you, Peter. Is implementing Azure worthwhile for improving business performance? How does that translate into agility and productivity metrics?
That's a great question, Rosie. I think from the perspective of business, Azure helps businesses in 6 sort of different ways, I think, and there might be more. I'm welcoming the audience to give us their input as well. One, competitive. In a competitive environment, businesses need to be able to adjust quickly, to be able to scale quickly, be able to try out new products and so on. The Microsoft Cloud Azure allows businesses to be able to do that. Number 2, sustainability. So, as we move forward to this new future, trying to, implement sustainable initiatives, businesses that own their own infrastructure have to be considerate of that, and that adds to the overall carbon footprint of a particular business. So leveraging hyperscaler clouds like Azure that are optimized and efficient to be able to run your workloads will definitely help businesses to maintain a better sustainability footprint going forward. 3, investment optimization. So considering workloads like Azure SQL Server or Microsoft SQL Server rather, there are ways that you can use those tools or that software in Azure in a more cost-effective way than you would if you were to use them on premise. So that is saving money for the business while adding additional flexibility and features. And number 4, which probably should be number 1, security in that Microsoft is committed to security, and Azure has been built with security and cybersecurity controls from the ground up to be able to help businesses to protect their assets and to ensure as best as possible that to minimize in terms of incidents associated with security, right? And then we talk about things like flexibility. Touched on it before. It allows you to adjust and make changes and scale and up and down as needed, depending on the types of workload that you're running in the cloud. You don't have to over provision, spend more money than you need, and have these really complicated hardware life cycles and so on and so forth. And again, I want to touch on scalability specifically because as businesses grow, specifically organizations, startups, as they start to evolve and gain more customers, it's difficult for you to use orthodox means to scale quickly and to deal with new demand or added demand and peaks and valleys in terms of customer requirements and so on. So a scalable solution like Azure, scalable platform like Azure allows those customers to be able to meet those demands quickly. And all of that goes towards, increasing revenue, optimizing and increasing efficiency and overall, improving business as a whole. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't stress it more what Peter just mentioned right now. Azure's biggest advantage, it has leveled the playing field as far as access to technology, which has really, really encouraged all these startups to be more innovative at the level that the large companies are. And we've seen a lot of companies have taken advantage of the Azure Spark, for example, for startups. That a single license, like Peter mentioned, a single SQL Server license would have really killed the budget of a startup, whereas for a fraction of that price, they have access to SQL, they have access to the analytics, they have access to the web app services, the development tool. So I think Microsoft has done an amazing job at leveling the field, and it's all thanks to Azure. So, yeah.
I did want to add one more point because you brought up startups and the cost. Microsoft actually has a program called Microsoft for Startups, and included in the benefits for that is $150,000 of Azure credit for 4 years for businesses that sign up. So, and this is a global program. It's not only available in the US. Incidentally, I'm a mentor in that program, so I can speak more about it. And if you have questions, then we can answer those as well. Yeah.
All right,
So free
great.
cloud.
Thank you both. My next question goes back to Kareem. In terms of cybersecurity, how does Azure shield our business data, and how does it differentiate from other cloud services?
I think today, cloud in general, all cloud service, the major ones at least, they are built with very strong security. I'm going to piggyback on what Peter said earlier. Microsoft Azure was built with security in mind. The fact that it was a late entrant to the cloud business actually gave it an advantage of understanding what the deficiencies were and building it in the core of Azure. That and the fact that Microsoft, not only on the cloud side, but even on the premise side, has been very big on security. And so having a Microsoft cloud platform and a Microsoft environment, whether you're running Active Directory, you're running Defender locally, all that has seamlessly translated into Defender Cloud, for example. Now you can have your cloud infrastructure and your on-premise infrastructure monitored from one place. You add to that the fact that on the cloud, Microsoft take it upon themselves to not only manage against hacking or the DOS, but also against ransomware, where that today that's one of the biggest threats, really. Ransomware touches any and everyone, right? Maybe DDoS, you have to have a very, very very high traffic site for you to be affected, right? Or if you're going to get hacked, you have to be really, really targeted for hacking surfaces. But because of the social engineering part of ransomware, we've seen a lot of small companies now get, we say hacked, but they're not. They get ransomware. And Microsoft has a few, if all your data is on the cloud, Azure has mechanism in there to detect the encryption as it's happening and stop it. And I think that's one of the biggest advantages of moving to the cloud, or being on the cloud, is that you're outsourcing a lot of that security over to Azure, and they're doing a beautiful job at it.
Yeah, that's
Right.
a great point, Kareem. I think it would be useful just to mention that across the Azure portfolio and across many of the services, at least most popular ones that customers use for their businesses, we have the Azure Defender product, Defender for Cloud, Defender for SQL, and so on, that are doing exactly what you talked about. There's built-in telemetry to actually, consume those events and then alert and then react quickly as those sorts of things happen. So definitely a platform that's built to secure customer data.
Okay, Peter. Thank you both. I have another question for you. How can Microsoft Azure help with digital migration? How difficult is it to do with cloud computing platform?
So migration sort of has different components to it, or you have different types of migrations. I think the most popular one, or the one that applies to most businesses, are what we call lift and shift migration or relocation type initiatives. And that is essentially taking workloads that were running on premise in a customer data center, um, and taking that workload as is and moving it to Azure. All right. And there are some complexities associated with it, because the Azure platform is different than your on-premise data center, and one has to essentially ensure that those workloads are right sized to run on the cloud for performance reasons as well as for cost optimization reasons. So Azure has a suite of tools that are available to help customers to, one, assess what they have on premise, to get a good idea of what is there, what the requirements are in terms of CPU, memory, storage, and all of those things, and then essentially recommend the appropriate SKUs within Azure or within the cloud to be able to migrate those workloads to. So you have things like Azure Migrate, you have database migration assistant, and in addition to that, we also have solutions from our partners that are built to help customers migrate. So that is one way to migrate. The other ways are things like refactoring, where you're taking a workload like SQL, where you had that database in a virtual machine that you manage, that you had to patch. But then when you migrate it to Azure, you have what we call platform as a service options, such as Azure SQL Server or Azure Database or Postgres, which is a managed database service. So it takes away a lot of the management headache that businesses used to have to be able to manage those platforms. You just bring the data to the cloud. And database migration assistant and the Azure migration assistant are tools that help you to do that as well. So without question, it's never easy to migrate your infrastructure to the cloud, but there are many tools and there are many services that Azure Microsoft has put in place to help customers to do so quickly, effectively, and safely. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Peter. Kareem,
And
Microsoft.
I was just going to add one thing that was very, very important from Microsoft's side, is that they've invested heavily in portability. by supporting Unix platforms, for example, by supporting other languages other than .NET. And they've basically made it easier for non-Microsoft users to move into Azure, because now a lot of that code base can be migrated as well, refactored obviously, but doesn't have to be rewritten from scratch. And kind of that Peter mentioned that, like, we just in the database side, for example, just migrate your data, will manage a database for you. They've taken that approach across the board, whether it's workflows, whether it's even Azure functions. A lot of the stuff, if you're used to a provider that Google Cloud Platform had functions for a long time, the fact that Microsoft had an answer to them and put it in Azure, that's actually it just shows you that they are going out of their way to make it easy for you not to change your solution architecture and just use the right tool, the right component, so that you can speed up and have a successful threat migration in the process.
All right. This next question is for you, Kareem. Microsoft Azure has unlimited scalability, but does it have limitations for team performance? And what can we learn from this?
Well, it's what Peter said earlier. When you're migrating from on-premise to cloud, performance is key. There has to be some refactoring taken into account. I mean, for example, if there's limitations according to what Microsoft allows you, what resources Microsoft allows you to dedicate to your compute session, you can't just walk into the building and plug in more memory. So yes, there are some, I wouldn't say limitations, but there are some aspects to consider when you're developing for the cloud, or when you're running on the cloud, that when you're on premise, you probably tend to overlook because you're just throwing hardware at it. So optimizing your code from a development perspective, code optimization when you're running on the cloud becomes super, super important. Now, would that limit you from doing business? Is there a limit? No, it's highly scalable. But your architecture should be flexible enough where you have multiple instances running in parallel. You're doing load balancing. So all that, Microsoft has the tools to handle all that, but you have to know how to use them and you have to be aware of them. So no limitation as far as resources, but a different way of thinking, a different approach to to cloud and hybrid environment than traditional on-premise.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that. And it's based on an example. I actually was having a conversation with a customer this week, and they were discussing how it's different for them, because on premise they could essentially spin up a virtual machine of any size or any, sort of in terms of specification, 4 CPUs, 4 gigs of RAM, whatever. But when migrating those workloads to Azure, you have specific templated SKUs that you have to adhere to. And, in some ways it can create some difficulty for customers to get their heads around that. But what is really important is to focus on that assessment phase. Because in many cases on premise, what you will find is that you have these workloads running, and you've specified these particular components and different sizes, but you're only using a fraction of that, right? You might have 4 CPUs, and on average you're running at 5% utilization, right? So it offers customers the opportunity to actually right size. So a virtual machine that has 4 CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM on premise may be able to run in Azure with 2 CPUs and 8 gigs of RAM, right? And it allows you to optimize in terms of cost, but still maintain appropriate performance for the application that you're running, right? So it you can have improved. Yeah.
All right, Peter, can you share with us what are other less known advantages that Azure can offer us?
I think we talked about security a lot, both Karim and I, but I'm not sure that it is well known in terms of the features that are available and services that are available in Azure to help you to secure those workloads. So I'm going to spend some time talking about that. So I touched on the Azure Defender for Cloud, um, um, services that are available. So there's Defender for containers, there's Defender for IoT, there's Defender for SQL. So as much as you can think of workloads that you want to run in the cloud, there are security products there that are optimized for that particular type of workload, and which is very important because not every security product works well for every single scenario. If you have something that's optimized for what you are doing, then there are going to be added areas where you can get efficiency and then also added opportunities to secure that particular type of work. So that is really important. Um, I work specifically in data, and one of the things that customers often don't know is that you can actually run SQL Server databases in Azure um, more cost effectively than anywhere else, right? So we have features like Azure Hybrid Benefits, which allows you to use the licenses that customers have already bought and invested in and have software assurance on, and take those licenses and then apply them in the cloud to get certain types of discounts and so on. Adding that to reservations, you can actually optimize the cost for running a workload in the cloud. Another service that's really, really important, and a few customers know about it, and I work with it directly, is one called Azure Data Explorer. And that is sort of a data analytics platform that's built for observability. So a lot of the data that is being fed and managed and assessed as it relates to security under the covers is using Azure Data Explorer. So it is a service that helps to secure Azure, helps to provide telemetry and monitoring capabilities in tools like log analytics, but customers can actually implement that within their environment to actually address those types of workloads. Lots of data coming in through IoT, lots of data, event data coming from things like Active Directory and other sort of security products. And you can quickly query that data to gain insights and then apply things like machine learning and so on to its predictive analysis. So, those are some of the things that are less known, and I could talk for an hour about that. But yeah, thank you.
All right, Peter, thank you. Kareem, how can we take advantages of Microsoft Azure not only for cloud teams, but other IT teams as well?
Well, by nature, Azure is meant for all kind of IT teams. So whether it's developers, there's a gamut of development tools from development environment to source control to DevOps. For IT people, there's obviously the whole virtual machines and web apps and service apps and API management. There's a lot of tools that are not just for the cloud engineers. What I could say is, if I could change the question a bit, could it help other teams that are non-IT related? And I think the answer is it's easily integratable into, for example, the 365 platform. We have anybody who's in Dynamics or familiar with Dynamics, then you're using Power Apps. And then within Power Apps, if a lot of business users actually can spit up low-code Power Apps themselves, but a lot of that actually uses Azure infrastructure if you're going to include, for example, AI into your Power App. Now you have somebody who has nothing to do with IT, a business user with Power App training, obviously, that can actually go ahead and consume Azure services to enhance the app that they're using. And that's just one example, right? The integration goes into Office 365. It goes through pretty much anything that is Microsoft can integrate into Azure. Reporting, Power BI, for example, there's a gamut of connectors. Let's talk about cost, for example. The business people can use Azure cost analysis to kind of make sure that they're only spending what they need to spend. Azure, for example, has a cost optimization product that puts you in the right consumption plan according to your budget, so that you're not, like anything, right? You buy three, you pay more, you pay less than if you buy one, right? But if you sign up for the one and you consume three, then the traditional, most of the other cloud platform, they'll charge you 3 times one. But if there was a promotion, get a 20% off if you buy three. Well, Azure, that plan, it counts. Okay, you used one, you used two, you used three. All of a sudden, I'm going to apply the discount. I'm going to sign you up for the pack of 3 as opposed to by individual. Those tools are mainly for finance people. They help the budgeting side. They don't necessarily help the data engineer who actually set up the machine eventually at the beginning, right? So there's a lot of, the cloud engineer that set up the machine. So there's a lot of ways Azure could be used, not only by cloud engineers, by IT folks in general, but also by business people.
All
Yeah,
right.
I definitely agree with that. And I always like to use examples actually. And one of the things that comes up often in discussions with customers is cost, right? Based on the economy, based on competitive situations, everybody's trying to optimize costs, lower costs, and improve on those things. And you mentioned things like Power BI. So we're working with a customer that essentially wanted to manage the costs associated with their analytics platform. And we were able to essentially use Power BI connected to the Azure billing API and create reports that were customized for that particular need, right? And that particular audience within the organization was finance. It had nothing to do with IT. And they were able to see the things that they needed to see. They were able to filter on things that were interesting to them while connecting back to the Azure billing API to get real-time data as it relates to the consumption going on within their tenant. So, it does sometimes require some customization and some sort of architecting by cloud engineers, but the end persona may not necessarily from IP. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both. My last question is for you, Peter. How can Microsoft Azure be integrated into our business? What do we need it for specifically?
So, it's a good question. However, it's our CEO Satya Nadella, just said Azure is the world's computer. So think of everything that organizations are doing with their IT infrastructure and their technology infrastructure, and then supercharge that. And that's what you can do with Azure. So if you're thinking about empowering digitally connected workforces, which is that many of businesses face and organizations face, due to the pandemic, Azure allows you to empower that. We have, services that allow users to connect remotely, actively, and run a desktop within the cloud in a cost-effective manner. The other thing that Azure allows you to do that is difficult to do on premise for businesses is to unlock value with data and AI. So you can actually start to do predictive analyses and so on of data that would be extremely difficult to do on premise, because the type of compute that is required to run these machine learning models is significant. and you'd have to pay for that, and you'd have to own it, and you have to depreciate it. But using a platform like Azure, you can spin it up when you need it, do your experiments, and then when you're finished, you get it again. So until you want it again, right? So those are some of the benefits that come from leveraging a platform like the cloud. So things like modernizing app experiences. App experiences. So organizations that have ERPs or platforms that they use for serving their customers, online ordering. All of those things are not easy solutions to implement, and you can't necessarily just um, develop, execute, run it, and if it fails, there's a significant investment associated with it. When you have a platform like Azure, you can do those types of things. You can spin up, compute and resources as you need. You can use PaaS services like Azure App Service or Azure Cosmos DB for particular types of business use cases that allows businesses to optimize the way that they execute their digital strategy. So, um, you know, thinking about things like increasing technical capacity and technical intent. Um, how do you get your teams to leverage technology to actually help them to execute and do well at their jobs and move the company forward, and reducing what we call technical debt. So those applications and that data that is legacy but contains insight that you need to get to. How do you extract that value from it and then optimize it and modernize it and then really start to really extract the real value of it? So definitely without we need, right? And businesses need type of capacity, but you can integrate it in any way that you can think of technology being relevant to a particular business. Yeah.
And and I would like to add, especially on the second part, is why do businesses need it? I would say businesses need it to stay relevant. Going forward, innovation is going to be the key to businesses thriving, or I would even dare to say to even stay in business. There's only so much innovation you could do on your own. Azure opens, what Peter said, a big array of tools that do innovation for you. If you're running an Azure SQL instance, well, guess what? It's really easy to put analytics, like he said, and predictive on it because all that tools is already in the infrastructure. Whereas if it was in-house, well, good luck licensing that and putting that and keeping it up to date and adding the latest model to it and having it as smart as the latest version. And to prove the point, nobody loves data on premise more than the government. And government now goes to these cloud like Azure and they say, okay, create a cloud just for the public sector. So Azure now there's the FedRAMP or cloud for government, where the government now has access to all these tools that Azure provides, of course, separated from the private sector. But that's how important moving to the cloud is, and a platform like Azure is, that even the US government realizes that, okay, you know what, we can't do this on our own. We need technology to tell us, to keep us in the forefront of innovation as well.
Just to add one final thing, I think we've sort of looked at it from a 30,000 foot view and a strategic perspective, but it's, for the techies, I think, sort of integrating into business kind of speaks to some of the tools and the services we have, such as Express Route, which allows organizations to actually extend their private networks directly into the cloud, to be able to access resources in the Azure cloud securely, without having to essentially traverse public networks. So that is sort of a technology solution that speaks specifically to integrating your business, your, a corporate Wi-Fi, or maybe not the Wi-Fi, but your corporate network with the Azure network, and allows you with a great deal of secure and high performance connectivity to the cloud.
All right. Thank you both for enlightening us and sharing all these wonderful insights. We're going to jump into our QA session. If anyone has questions, please feel free to send them over our chats and we will be able to respond them live. I do already have a couple that were sent to me. So you both are welcome to answer these questions. I have one now that says, what are the Microsoft Azure KPIs that I should take into account when measuring my team performance?
I think Peter mentioned it earlier when he talked about the client that wanted a dashboard to monitor spend. Yeah, that's definitely one I think you want to keep a close eye on. The resources that are spun up and the ones that are, and how much money you're paying for them. Relative to spend performance, it's very important to have good metrics around the instances that are up, how performant they are. Do you really not, regardless of the spend, right? It's about user experience. It's about making sure the people have the most optimized experience while they're managing through your systems that are hosted on the cloud. So, I mean, those are the two that come to mind right away. I'm sure Peter can think of other ones that he sees every day dealing with the clients, but on a high level bird's eye view, those are the two that I'll probably keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think I suppose it depends on how you define KPIs, but I think things like access control, who has access to what, are sort of metrics that need to be consistently monitored. So in terms of how your team interacts with, for example, the Azure portal, you want to be continuously monitoring when team members are accessing, what they're accessing, what they're able to create, what they're able to destroy or delete, who has access to grant privileges and so on and so forth. So just from a security perspective, there are a couple of metrics there that are really important to essentially give businesses a view as to who has access, and that is something critical for all businesses to monitor and manage. I think things like, as Karim mentioned, performance, things like reliability. For example, how resources and applications are architected for the cloud are things that are critical in terms of monitoring how your team is essentially performing, because there's no point in migrating a workload from on-premise or building a brand new application in Azure and having poor performance or poor security or poor availability. The goal is to build an application that meets the business needs and delivers the value that is expected. So I think those are some of the things that need to be monitored.
Great. Thank you both. I see I have another question. Peter, how does Microsoft Azure work with other Microsoft products to boost business performance?
So I think Microsoft Azure is one of 3 clouds that Microsoft has. So I think many of our customers, many organizations are familiar with the 3 clouds, Microsoft Azure being one. then Microsoft 365, which is your, office automation, your Exchange, email, SharePoint, all of those things. And then Dynamics 365 is another cloud that is your ERP, your CRM, and so on, your financial management. So what's really compelling about the Microsoft offering is that together they form the most trusted and comprehensive cloud platform that exists. And what Microsoft has done is to work very, very diligently to ensure that there are integrations between these different platforms, right? So if you have, you leverage Azure Active Directory is an example. It is a identity platform that allows you to be able to define and enforce identity controls or access controls across all three clouds simultaneously. So, whoever you define that has access to D365 from a particular location or jurisdiction, that is enforced within, what we call conditional access and so on and so forth. And it's enforced across all the clouds simultaneously. So there's a lot of integration that goes in. We can leverage tools like Power BI to extract data from Azure for cost management, for optimization, for efficiency studies. We can leverage things like Power Apps to be able to run experiments using Azure machine learning to be able to take data that is in the Power Platform and essentially do machine learning models on top of that and provide predictive analyses and so on. So deep integration across all the platforms, and it's I just think it's amazing. Yeah?
All right. Thank you, Peter. I have another question. How can I get Microsoft Azure certification for my team, and what are the benefits?
Well, the Microsoft has a portal. I think it's learn.microsoft.com, where like all the certifications are there. But there's a lot of certifications. Depends on what kind of team you're in. And there's app makers, there's developers certifications, there's data engineers, there's even certification for business users. Like I think there's one that's called consultant, like functional consultant. So there's a lot of certification that you can get from Azure because it's such a big environment. It's kind of, you need specialization within one area. It's very difficult for one person to know everything there is to know about Azure. Why is it needed? Why is it important? Well, like anything else, if you want to use something to its most optimal use, you should read the user manual. And you should learn from the people that created it. So I think that's the quickest answer to that. The other answer is that for talent out there, for young engineers who actually are looking for a job, it makes finding a job a lot easier. And it also another thing about certification is that it opens your mind to new ways of doing things, especially if you're taking cross certifications. Say you're taking one for AI and you take another one for data science, and you'll see a lot of concepts overlap, but then there's a lot of other concepts that are complementary, and then it's nice to know how to handle both. So yeah, there's a learning aspect. There is an actual practical aspect of using it, and there is the best practices.
Yeah, I can add to that. I sometimes mentor sort of younger engineers or younger professionals getting into the business, and one of the things that I say is that, and I've experienced, is that certifications get you the job, right? But possibly, advanced, orthodox, tertiary education, stuff like degrees, may allow you to move up within that role, right?
But definitely, without question, if you would like to, you know, work in tech, if you'd like to work in cybersecurity, if you'd like to work as a data analyst, then in many cases, the first step that one has to take is to go to Microsoft Learn and review the courses that are there. They're extremely extensive. They include things like labs that spin up and spin down so that you can actually see how those things are working. And then you can go ahead and take those exams. And it's okay to fail it the first time or the second time, right? But just keep going. And once you achieve these things, there are a couple of things that will happen. One, it will open up opportunities for better roles, um, jobs that you didn't have, meet the qualifications for. And two, one will get a sense of achievement. You've achieved something. You've worked hard, and you've, learned the material, and then you've gone take an exam, and then been successful at it. And regardless of where you are, that is going to be helpful. All right, so go for it.
All right. Thank you both. I have one more question. What are the suggestions to get the most out of implementing Azure in my company?
I'll take that one. I think so. Having gone through this process many times, Microsoft has invested in creating some frameworks that will help customers to go through this cloud journey or that cloud journey, and to increase the chances of success. So one, there is the cloud adoption framework, right? And the cloud adoption framework helps organizations to understand what it means or what it will take for them to take their assets and migrate those to the cloud, right? It starts with a process of defining a strategy, the business justification and so on. It creates a plan. So this is an actionable plan of what the steps that need to be taken. It also prepares the cloud environment for hosting those workloads that you're moving, right? And then, it has a migration phase that helps with the migration. All through that, it is doing things like allowing one to innovate, to their guidelines for securing the workloads, their guidelines for managing those workloads, and then to introduce things like governance to be able to meet your compliance requirements. And then third, I think finally, things like organization, which allows you to do the right things for your people, right? How do we skill up our people to learn to be able to manage those workloads in Azure as opposed to managing them on premise? So that's the cloud adoption framework. Adopting that and working with your Microsoft partner or your Microsoft team to do that is going to help you to be successful. In addition to that, there's another framework called the well-architected framework. And the well-architected framework is a framework that helps organizations to build applications in Azure successfully, right? To be able to meet those business requirements. And it has 5 key tenets: reliability. How do you recover if something goes wrong? Because, it's computers, right? And technology. Things may go wrong. So you have to build that reliability into it. Security. How do you secure that particular workload? So if that workload is using open source databases, if that workload is using, some sort of analytics platform or, scalable platform, how do you secure that? Cost optimization is also important. How do you ensure that you're not paying more for delivering a service than you definitely need to, right? So there's no point in doing that. And I think it's really important for businesses to take advantage of that and adopt that. Also, operational excellence is the fourth one. And that is about how do you run that workload? What is the telemetry and the information that we need, or your team needs to be able to manage that workload successfully to be able to deliver that service. And then performance efficiency. How does that particular system or application, adapt to changes in workload. How do you scale up? How do you scale out? All of that needs to be built into the application from the beginning to ensure that that workload is successful. So adopting these frameworks and working with your teams, working with Microsoft to ensure that these are implemented from the beginning would lead to getting the most benefit from Azure. Yeah.
I totally agree. I think all the frameworks, everything that Peter just said right now is super important, including, work with Microsoft, work with partners. There's experts out there that have done it. They can guide you through that. I'm just going to add one more thing is when these kind of initiatives, they're actually digital transformation initiatives. And most of them, they don't necessarily fail for technical reasons, but they fail for people reasons. One of the most important things to also keep in mind is organizational change management. How is this going to affect the people inside the company after you're done with the technical part successfully? Adoption rate has to be at 100% within the organization for it to be successful. So that's something to keep in mind. In parallel, you're actually building the infrastructure from a technical side, but also preparing the people to be able to use it once it's out there.
Right. Thank you both, Kareem and Peter, for all of these insights. For everybody that's watching, Advancio is a Microsoft Golden Partner. We're ready to offer you different Microsoft products starting with Azure. So if you're interested in any of Microsoft solutions, please feel free to reach out to us on our website at advancio.com or our social media as Advancio. And we also have a surprise for everyone that is here. We recently started a cost calculator that gives you immediate feedback and an average cost based on your project requirements. So in order to view that, you just have to go to advancio.com/project cost calculator. And for all of you that registered, we'll be sending a survey your way. If you have any questions, we will happily be able to answer them. And we've come to an end of our talk. So if you know anyone that could find interesting the solutions that were discussed today, please share our series, and you can also find it on Advancio's YouTube channel. So that would be it on my behalf. Thank you for joining us on this 2022 full of tech talks, and we will see everyone next year.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Rosie.
Take care. Thanks, Rosie.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Kareem.
Have a great day, everyone.